Hello and welcome to another episode of Dealer Talk. So this is a very special episode. Obviously, we've concluded with season one and working on season two, but we wanted to put this extra episode together, kind of in between the two seasons, so that we can have this amazing conversation. I'm very excited to introduce our guest for today. This person has tons of experience in the automotive industry. As somebody that I've worked with professionally in the past, and he's also a friend. So I'm just very excited to see where the conversation goes, and just excited to kind of put this out for everybody to check it out. Erik, what's going on, man? How you doing?
Oh, fantastic, Herb. I'm looking forward to today's recording, and hopefully we can, just continue on this adventure.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, for sure. So I just want to make a couple of mentions. Don't forget to send us your questions. We are working on a website, so that's going to be coming soon, where you can connect with us there. But in the meantime, reach out to Erik or myself on LinkedIn. Make sure to send the questions, and we'll definitely bring those up to the guest. The goal there is to obviously be able to provide some direct feedback to any challenges or any issues that you have, anything that might help you, with a different perspective, or just something that you can take back and apply to your day to day. Also wanted to make a couple shout outs. I want to say thank you to Mark Metry. Dude, appreciate the support. Thanks for all your help with the tips on production and things of that nature. Definitely Erik and myself are learning through this process and just working to putting the best product out there for all the listeners. So without further ado, I'm excited to get things rolling here. So our guest for today, like I mentioned, is somebody that's worked in the dealership, has had multiple positions, now as a consultant for one of the bigger companies in the automotive industry right now, which is Cox Automotive. We work together as consultants. He was actually one of my mentors within the company, and I'm just super excited to have him on the show with us today and just have a conversation about the automotive industry. So without further ado, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce Mr. David Cole.
Well, thank you, Herb. Good morning, Erik. How are you?
Oh, fantastic. Just fantastic, David. How are you?
I'm super excited to be here. I was listening to these podcasts, and, I really, really appreciate the invite. I love what you guys are doing. I'm super, super excited to be here and talk car business.
Good.
All right. So let's just kick things off here. Before we do that, why don't you give, just for the audience, I always like to have the guest give us a little recap. That way they know kind of what your experiences are.
Right on. So I sold my first car as a Green Pea in 1997. And that was kind of my intro to retail automotive. And I can't say it was a quick love affair. It took me a couple of years to really get my bearings. I wound up selling cars for about 3 years, and then I built the internet department at our store. I worked at a VW store in LA. And we built our internet department in 2000, 2001. And after some success there, I found myself in F&I, where I got comfortable for about 8 years. I was the only writer in our store. We did about 120 new and used a month. So I spent 8 years in the box, and then I got out to the desk, and I was there for a couple of years. And I left retail as the general sales manager of my store. And I left really for personal reasons, just to kind of have weekends off and find a little work-life balance and find another aspect of automotive. And that's when I landed at Cox Automotive. And I've been there just about 8 years. So I'm 20 plus years in. Love the car business. love the people I meet and the challenges we face and the victories that we share. So it's a good place to be.
Yeah, for sure, man. So we had Keith Tyson on the show recently, and I kind of started off with a general question on the automotive industry, and I think your guys' perspective is a powerful one, because you've both been in the automotive business, right, doing the day-to-day, like selling, managing, that whole deal. But now as consultants, you get to be on the other side of the desk and look at all these different dealerships, and you have conversations with all these decision makers. So, as far as the automotive industry, like, what are you hearing? Like, what is the kind of the perspective or the perception out there with the decision makers that, during your consultative conversations, like where do you see it as a whole?
I mean, that's a good question. I think we're at an interesting place in the car business, right? Because we're getting further away from the old school, right? Work the four square and rip everybody's heads off and put balloons on cars. And the old school there's still a segment, I think, that it exists in, but there's also some forward thinking that is taking the industry in different directions. As we begin to talk about autonomous cars and digital retail, and you see a lot of these mom and pop shops kind of getting bought up by some of the major players. So you see some consolidation. I think it's always evolving, right? And I think that's what we're at an interesting time. And from what I gather, the sets of challenges that dealers face are definitely shifting.
Hey, David, I want to pull it back for a second. And the only reason why I want to ask this question, because I want to approach it from a perspective of somebody brand new coming into the business. I want this to be a usable, informative aspect for them as well. So my question is this. You say it took you some time to fall in love with the car business. It took you some time to gain some traction. What was it about the car business that you fell in love with? What was it that kept you in for so long? What was if you could put your finger on something that really kind of, maybe excited you, or whatever the relationship was, what was the one thing that kept you in the car business for as long as it did?
I love it. That's a great question, Eric. For me, it was I had an aha moment when I realized the opportunity that could come with the car business. Right? It's such a unique place to do business. In my mind, it's such a people business, right? So you build this network, and you get to build these relationships, on both sides of the house, right? Within whether it's the factory or the lender, your colleagues, and then the general public. So it's really a people business, but it's also an opportunity to learn business, right? To really grow and, build a life and a career. And it took me a couple of years. I started when I was like 21. So it wasn't until about 24, 25 that I really realized, hey, this isn't just a job. I mean, I can make this a future. And, if I'm good at it, I can, become successful. And once I realized that, then I was all in. And it's been an amazing journey. It really has. There's so many different areas that you can grow in automotive. And that's even tenfold on the side that I'm on now, right? Getting, for so many years, and I heard Herb say this in another episode, right? And I often refer to, when you're in a dealership, you're a student of the deal, right? You learn everything there is to know about, how to handle a customer, how to handle objections, how to, whether it's directional selling or how to hang paper, fill out credit apps. And there's just so much to learn in regards to the deal. But there's so much more to automotive, right, than just that deal. So now I find myself really a student of the industry. And now there's so much more that you can learn, and different avenues that you can really strive to succeed and achieve in. And that to me is it's growth. And that's what's made me a lifer. I hope to be in this business till I sail off into the sunset. It's an exciting business.
I love that. I'm going to keep on going down this path with me. So just please bear with me, because, so many times when working with young sales staff, or maybe young to the business, they're always making bold statements. Hey, listen, I want your job. I'm after your job, and I can appreciate that from a growth aspect. But how would you compare to being on the desk as compared to being in the box, to being on the floor? What do you think is kind of like, when does somebody kind of max out? No, that's not the question I want to ask. I want to know the difference between the two mindsets, because I think that there's something to be gained from these people who are young in the industry about, what it really means to be responsible for an organization as compared to being responsible for just your own self. So if you would please just feed us that information.
Yeah, that's also a good question. I would tell that young salesperson to be careful what you wish for. There's looking back, right, there's something to be said for being an individual contributor. And when you're on the floor, it's about you, right? And how many cars you can sell and how much money you can make. Back in the days when I was doing it, it was really about like, who can I put together? And as you grow, you kind of start to realize that for me, I wanted to begin to help people, right? I wanted to be able to help my clients or customers who became clients. So you start to kind of get away from that selfish mindset, or at least I did. And you wanted to have an impact on others, and whether, on the floor, that's really your customers, and to a certain extent, the people you work for, right? But when you get into F&I, you get onto the desk, you find yourself in leadership positions, and I think you have an opportunity to help people exponentially, and you'll find that the selfishness that might have led you there, at least led me there, that becomes secondary, and the money comes, but really you have a greater impact to to contribute more by helping others.
So would you say that selling is the best job in the house, or it just depends on the type of person that you are?
Yeah, it really does depend on the type of person, because there's some people, you had a guest previously who's like the number one salesperson in the country. And for him and others like him, that is the best seat in the house, because you really get to advise, so many people on these big decisions that they have. And that's, I'm sure, very fulfilling, right? So for someone like that, that's the best seat in the house. For me, I always thought F&I was the best seat in the house, because it was the most fun, because you could, help put these loans together and these deal structures together. And there was always a problem to solve for, whether it's getting an advance or residualizing an ad, or, trying to get a tier bump. I mean, it was always something exciting, to solve for. And so for me, that was probably my favorite seat. And then on the desk, you're when you get into sales management, there's so many other kind of facets that can fill your bucket, right? Whether it's helping that young salesperson find their way in their career, or helping your factory rep take a different allocation off their hands. I mean, there's so many different areas. So it really just depends on the person. I think there's great victories in every seat in the house, really. I'm sure the service manager would tell you the same thing.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. So, looking at technology, and in particular what you currently do, right, where you're consulting and visiting multiple dealerships, how would you connect? And this is obviously for the people that are taking ops that are actually selling, but how would you have a conversation of the value or the impact of technology within the store and utilization, right? So one of the things that we've talked about in the show is accountability. But and I know that from consulting, like what I used to do when I was with Cox Automotive and what I do right now, we're always having these conversations with like the decision makers who are expected to kind of bring that down. If they have a new process or a new widget or whatever, bring that down all the way to to the floor, right, to the salespeople. But what can you talk about to those guys that are and gals, guys that are doing it on technology utilization and making sure that they're not only aware of what widgets and what tools the dealership has, but actually engaging and utilizing them. Perfect example, like somebody comes in to buy a car and they're like, okay, I'm going to go see another dealership, right? If that person knows that a third-party site has that they're a part of has an app, why not use that to get that customer to browse while they're in the store instead of letting that person leave? Things like that.
Yeah, I think technology is paramount, right? I think you have to be aware of what's going on around you. You might not need to adopt every shiny object that comes by, but you have to be aware of it, right? Its features, its advantages, and its benefits. You kind of have to practice what you preach. I think relevance is key, and as soon as you become irrelevant, there's a problem in your journey to success, right? So I've got a 14-year-old and a 10-year-old, and it's mind-boggling to me that kids today learn how to operate technology before they learn how to speak, right? I mean, they can work an iPad before they can communicate.
That's true.
So if as those generations grow, you have to be able to be relevant. And if you can't turn on a computer, right, or understand the way that they're behaving, particularly, getting back to the technology in our industry, you have to know how they found you or what journey they took in their research and in their shopping. And if you don't know how to work the tools, then you're left behind. And on the flip side of that, if you don't know how to maximize the technology and extract the data that's available today and how it's organized, how do you know where your opportunities are for growth? How do you know what you're executing well on and where your misses are? So you have to be able to navigate the technology that's available. It's astonishing to me today when we look at some of the tools that are available to dealers and to the consumer. I mean, the iPhone came out in 2006, right? The smartphone. That's not that long ago. And when you look at now what we can do with it, I mean, we scan VIN numbers, right? And suddenly it's now in our DMS, and there's it's just you have to keep up with technology. If you get left behind, I gotta believe it's going to hurt you in business.
No, I agree. And so alongside of that, what about data? Like at the store level, what are your thoughts on, data utilization, understanding the data, right? Because when you think about all the different providers that exist within the automotive industry, and any dealer can have any amount of different tools or different widgets that are going to produce different amounts of information. What can you talk about that as far as the utilization of that data to actually either hold your staff accountable or use that to sell more cars and have positive impacts within the organization or that dealership in particular?
So I feel like there's so much data available on so many different platforms that it can be overwhelming to any of us. But to kind of like I was saying with technology, right? To not be aware of the data that's available to you, there's a miss, right? How do you make decisions? How do you make informed decisions without first knowing? I mean, some of the data I imagine is irrelevant, right? But if you don't know what's irrelevant, then we don't know what we don't know. And
yeah, but could it be confusing, right? So, just for example, just for generality of this example, like let's look at a tool like Viato, right? It has tons of information, right? But is that really relevant? Once you take into consideration geography, things of that nature. If a dealership is further removed from a metro area, don't they stand to have a better advantage? As far as pricing, because it's longer distances and things of that nature. But when you look at a tool like Viato or any of these other merchandising tools, if you will, that's not really, it's not necessarily applicable, but yet, what do you do with that information?
That's a good point. I think you need to extract what does benefit you, right? If you look at a tool like Viato and you're looking at taking in a car and the market's flooded with them, right? Viato might, dissuade you from stepping up on that car or taking that car. Yet that's your bread and butter, and you know that you're going to be able to put somebody. So then at that point you follow what you know based upon you. But there's more data there that you might not have known otherwise without having that information, right? And that's real time data. What's going through auction? How many units are in the market? What's the market day supply? What's the price point? There's so much that can help you. So it's your job to do your due diligence, or our job to be able to navigate what matters to me and what can I, disregard. Right. But if you don't, if you just bury your head in the sand and just say, well, it's too much, it's overwhelming, then you're going to get left behind.
Right. It's better than the alternative, right? It's better than not having that information and not utilizing it. And then, just kind of going by, instinct, if you will, on what's going to move, what works, You
got to be willing to consider both sides of the coin in any decision you make, right? And I think you need data to help you tell that story, and it's available to us. And whereas before it just wasn't, so.
No, Viato's a scalpel, man. I love Viato. I totally agree with everything you're saying. You just have to pay attention to the fine print per se. Hey, so I want to pull you back to the dealership again, and again, I'm trying to approach this. I want to formulate this question for the sales staff. I really want to squeeze as much value out of you. And I don't mean to keep jerking you around, slapping you around from place to place, but it's important that we get your experience spread out here as much as possible. So I want to talk about for me, people ask, well, what is selling? I mean, sales has always been comfort, being comfortable, or confidence. And I think there's a lot of the confidence that can be gained from putting yourself out there and kind of creating a brand for yourself as a salesperson at the dealership level. Do you believe in branding yourself within the brand per se? Do you think there's some value to be learned there for people who are sales staff at the dealership level?
Oh, without question. Absolutely. Right. Like, and your prior guests have spoken about that as well. People buy from people, right? And what's going to separate me from the other folks that they might cross paths with? As salespeople, we run our own business within a business. And, you can be an 8-car a month guy, or you can be a 20-car a month guy. And as we've heard, you can be a 30-car a day guy if you want to be. And that's really, what you put into it. I can remember back in the day, there was so much about, well, that's my customer, and did they ask for you, and all this kind of stuff. And today, with all these different platforms and social medias and different ways, to tell your story and give people a reason to buy from you, I think you'd be negligent not to brand yourself, right? Then you're just waiting on circumstance to maybe come your way, and that's not being proactive. So, I love what one of your previous guests said about being involved with the community and
yes,
there's so many.
Ali.
Yeah, Ali. That was just a great great, insight to what it means to be successful. And I would argue that you could take that philosophy and apply it to any industry, right? What you put into it and how sincere you are, and how much it's really about helping others. And it's still a challenge for me to wrap my head around that, because when I got to Cox Automotive in this side of the house, right, and I would hear successful people in the role that I'm in now be asked, hey, what's your key to success? And they would say things like, well, I really care about my dealers, and I care about, I'm coming from a different, a different background where it's like, listen, we're there to sell. That's what we're there to do. We're there to make money and sell you a car. And what I've learned since is that, if you really care about who you're doing business with, good things seem to happen. Right. So yeah, that to me is key to building your brand, right? Be there for others. If it's just about your agenda, then, you're self-serving, and it probably isn't going to pay off in the long run.
So you came into the auto industry in 97, you say?
Correct.
Yeah. So you've seen some changes, because 97 websites, that's a foreign subject to not only the auto industry, but as all industries as a whole. So with that landscape changing, how has it changed for the dealership in your eyes, in your view, with your experience? Meaning that where are the opportunities for each dealership these days? Does it still exist in the service department? Does it still exist in the walk-ups? Is it only online presence? Where do we need to be paying attention to as somebody in a dealership trying to sell a car today? Man, where am I going? What am I doing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think all of the above, right? Yes, I think there's opportunity in the service drive. I think there's opportunity in every aspect of the dealership. But yeah, when I started, it was 56K dial-up modem, right? Websites weren't there yet. And, every Saturday and every Sunday, we would go out and we'd merchandise our lot, right? We'd repark the cars first thing in the morning, make sure they're all lined up. We put balloons on the cars and get all the dust off of them. And we'd really spend time on our point and making sure that, anybody who saw us saw that we were ready to do business and we had a good product. And today I think that translates to our website. I think our virtual showroom, and we say it sounds cliche, we say it a lot, but it's so important. It's equally as important. If we would take 2 hours to repark cars and put balloons, you can take a half hour to make sure that your cars are merchandised right on your website. It's an essential part of the process. And I think I think as time goes on, and the industry continues to evolve, particularly at the retail level and the way we do business at dealers. Hopefully more time and energy will be spent really understanding the importance of your digital presence, and the story that you can tell. We all learned our value proposition as to why, I grew up and worked in Los Angeles, right? And so at my store, I had 5 competing VW stores within 10 miles of each other, right? And so we had to, and this was before the internet, right? So people would come in and say, I just came from this store and that store and the other store, and they gave me this number. And now you're just racing to the bottom, and they've been lowballed and all this kind of nonsense. And you'd have to tell people, look, this is why you buy from me. And so that value proposition can be done passively on your website. And to not have it done and to not tell that story, whether it's through social media and the free platforms that you speak of, then you have to build that brand. And if you do that, then you begin to separate yourself from the folks that don't. And there's plenty of them out there that don't. Let me tell you, I'm in these stores every day. And, I think you said it before, Herb. It really shouldn't be that difficult to separate yourself from the saturated market and the competition that's out there by just putting forth some effort, to pay attention to that stuff and tell your story, whether it's the story on your product or the story on your mission or the story on your process. Tell a story.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I think that, and I think I actually mentioned this on a previous episode, but I think that differentiating ourselves within the industry is probably one of the easiest things to do when you really, really think about it, because everybody does it the same way. It's the same message. It's the same approach. It's just the same. So if you switch it just a little bit, you stand out.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I totally agree.
So speaking of that, so you mentioned something that kind of caught my ear here, and that was, you talked about digital presence. And I think that's such a big part of the miss in the environment today, or in the industry. Can you talk about some of the things that you see that are just easy to fix, right? So let's give the audience some practical advice that they can take back to the dealership. So things that are easy to fix, that need to be paid attention to more, and that don't require a lot of movement to get these things implemented, whether it's on a website or third-party sites or.
Yeah, that's such a loaded, because I think there's room for improvement everywhere, right? In the people and how they conduct themselves. Are you, and I don't want to call out any restaurant analogies, right? But there's a certain type of dining experience you get when you go to a Michelin star restaurant, or
right,
Morton. You know what I mean? There's the kind you get at your local dive. So the experience and the people is one. Well,
let me put it this way. So in 2018, I still go to dealerships' websites and I see cars that don't have pictures.
Yeah, well,
that are not
I was
priced.
getting to that.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, but what do you fix first? And I don't know how, because you could have all the cars merchandised right, and you could have all the budget set for marketing. You could do all kinds of things right, and as soon as you set foot in the door, everything goes south because the people aren't. So, okay, and I see where you're going with that, and I'll follow suit. Yes, folks. Yeah, as a dealer, it's so hard to take our dealer hat off, right? And even on my side of the house now, it's hard to take my vendor hat off, if you will, or my advisor hat, however you want to call it. Just go be a customer. Go, and we call it mystery shop. Forget mystery shop. Go be a customer, and ask yourself, right? Would you buy? I don't know if you shop on Amazon or eBay or however you transact online. Ask yourself: do you want to look at stock photos, or do you want to look at the photo that you're of the merchandise? And I don't want. I got to be careful on this tangent because this is just low hanging fruit, right?
But it's not happening.
It's not happening.
Crazy to me, right?
It is, and I can only say that it's hard enough to get a completed credit application on a showroom floor. So now we want dealers that have 300, 400, 500 car inventories to go take 27 photos of every car that's turning, 30, 40 units a day. It's not. I don't want to profess that it seems easy in theory. Right, but you have to execute the process. You have to set up the processes and execute them, and I got to believe that's challenging. So we just shelve it. And we cherry pick, and it's like we're trying to shoot fish in a barrel to sell as many cars as we can, but we're not really willing to find the right bait and to get the right gear to go in the right waters to where the fish are swimming, and get the right deckhands to spear them. I mean, there's so many things that go into. But yeah, take pictures, take videos, tell your story. I shouldn't go to a staff page of any dealership's website and get, old Polaroids of people that aren't there anymore. Be relevant.
or the ones where you go to the website and there's like 3 guys.
Yeah.
Right, and the rest of the staff's not even in there.
I mean, listen, you wouldn't go on a dating app with a stock photo and no detail. Like, you just have to think. Common sense is easily overlooked on so many parts.
So let me ask you this, because this is interesting. So I mean, only because the industry is changing and there's a lot of things to pay attention to. Let me ask this question from the aspect of somebody. Let's talk about if in fact I was coming to the market, I wanted to open a dealership. Let's say I'm going to open a 50 to 60 car dealership. How do we go about gaining the most traction through your eyes that you recommend? How do you go about doing that? I think that's a great question.
I do too. And there's some different answers. I'm going to stick on that community vibe because I think the most successful dealers that I've seen are pretty well established in the community, whether it's in the schools or the charity events. But you got to be involved in your backyard, right? Because to me that's the good good vibes that you put out there, right? And that comes back to you. So get involved in the community would be one, and know your market, right? Like, and know your business plan. If you just because you want to open a 50, 60 car store, what kind of cars do you want to sell, right?
Right.
What kind of demographic are you reaching? What you know, have a strategy, and based upon what you're, or at least have a purpose or a goal, and then figure out a strategy that fits that. You can't just, you know, I've seen so many folks that I've worked with over the years that can just do it themselves, and they'll go and they'll get the license and they'll get the building and they'll get a couple of cars, and they'll wonder, you know, 2 years later why they're back on the floor. And it's like, well, you got to have a plan, and you have to utilize the data that's available to determine what's important to you, right? And whether that's, you know, what kind of market share is out there and who's capturing the most market share. Know your competition. It's an overwhelming task, right? To think of opening. I'm getting anxiety just thinking about it. Like, where do I open this store? Who do I hire? But yeah, you know, you do your research and have a plan. You can't just, you know, throw darts at a dartboard and hope something hits the bullseye.
So,
Yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
All right. So I have this question. I think you're probably as close to perfect to answer it because your background, right? Both and in the dealer and now consulting. But, you know, we hear this concept of if we're in an efficient market, right? So buyers and sellers have access to information, the same amount of information, which is completely different than things, you know, it's completely different now than things were 10, you know, years ago or whatever. So how does that translate, you know, for those folks that are in the dealership taking off selling cars? Like, how does that translate in the buying experience today, right? Because when you think about it, many research suggests that customers do 14 hours of research before they walk into the dealership. So that customer, you know, only visits 1.5 dealerships during their purchasing process or journey, if you will. So to me, that says that customer that walks into your store has already made their decision. They're there to buy. They're extremely valuable, right? Because they've done all this pre-work before ever walking into your store. But I often see a miss, you know, because of things like transparency, which we talk a lot about within the industry, experience, which is another piece that I hear talked about to death, but nobody really, you know, talks about those things in specifics.
So your question is, how important is transparency?
No, but how does it impact the fact that we're in an efficient marketplace and knowing and understanding as a salesperson that customers do all this research prior to walking into your store and they're there to buy, right? Because they do, right? They do 1.5 visits. So they're there. If a customer shows up, in my mind, in 2018, if somebody shows up to my dealership, they're there to buy, period. They've already done all the research, you know, that they're there to make a purchase. So it's our job to kind of remove all the obstacles so that they can purchase the car. But we get into these situations where, you know, because of transparency or because of the experience, which are things that we talk about a lot within the industry, but we're not really delivering on those things, or we're not being, you know, we're not focusing on the specifics of what those words really mean. There could be a lot of missed opportunities.
Yeah, man. And that's a complicated concept because where do you start, right? And I hate to keep copping out with that kind of an answer, but I agree with you. If someone's on a showroom floor, they're probably ready to pull the trigger and transact. So what prevents them from transacting? And oftentimes we get in our own way. And I would argue that we've gotten in our own way even before they show up at our dealership. They show up at our dealership in some cases just because that's the car that they want and you happen to have it, right? But I would say, one of the things I'm most passionate about in the spirit of transparency is flat rate pricing, right? And if you go search 150 cars for sale online, how many of them are going to be priced at $14,995, right? That to me, at hello, you're already starting to kind of hide your cards, right? Because you don't want $14,995 for the car. You want $15,000 for the car. So price it at $15,000 up front. Because by not doing that, you're already saying to the customer, I'm trying to trick you.
Yeah.
You know, so the culture as a whole is disconnected. And I think that's because we were so successful selling cars for so many decades a certain way. Really successful. Empires were built by selling cars a certain way. And that has been handed down to how many dealers have you walked into that was a hand-me-down dealership from, a parent or a grandparent? Right. So this culture has been passed down, and we're beginning to see that start to shift, right? Because now we're getting the consumers are better equipped. Dealers have access to more data, et cetera, et cetera. So transparency is key from the trade-in, and we talk about it all the time, right? Being upfront with the trade process, right? And a lot of dealers, and me being one, still have a hard time getting rid of the UA, right? It's still one of the only profit margins left that's not, that and buy rate, and even that's pretty much out the window. So, how do you be transparent in the trade process and still capture a UA? It's a fine line, right? But you be less self-serving and less about your agenda and be there to, and I hate to steal from someone else, but advise, right? Find what obstacles have to overcome and advise the client up front would be my advice if I was working on a show.
Do you think that during that process, is it the salesperson maybe that misses the importance of what it means for somebody to actually show up to the dealership, understanding that person has all this information already prior to ever walking into the door? Or do you think that it could be when the salesperson goes to their manager to negotiate, right? Because obviously that's part of the deal or part of the process. Do you think that could be where it gets missed, where there's the salesperson and the customer, and then the salesperson and their manager during the desking process? Or it depends, right? Depends on the situation.
It's across the board, right? Yeah. I mean, it's the management that's really seems to be most responsible for bringing in the people, right? Whether it's having the right inventory or merchandising it right or pricing it right. Although we could argue that it's the salespeople's responsibility by building their own brand on these various platforms to draw their own audience to buy cars. But, the miss is across the board. This isn't there's no I in team, right? It's a collective effort. And I think the dealerships that I've found to be the most successful seem to be in sync, right? And it's from the top down and vice versa, where everybody's just in unison. And they're one-offs. I mean, I wouldn't say that it's large volume of stores, but that disconnect is across the board.
Yeah, no. I agree. Dude, it's been awesome to have you on. We could definitely go for hours here. Just kind of put you on the spot and invite you back on the show. So we'll appreciate it. Let's definitely do this again. There is one question that I always ask the guests that come on the show, and obviously I'm going to ask you that question now. So where do you see the automotive industry headed in the next 5 years, and why?
That's a good question. None of us have a crystal ball, right? I would argue that 3 years before Uber, right, nobody knew what Uber was going to be 5 years from now. And I'd say the same for Amazon. It's really tough to answer that and expect to be accurate because we don't know what we don't know. I think that the dealers that continue to grow over the next 5 years are the ones that are willing to pivot the most, right? Be relevant, be willing to learn and grow. I gotta believe that the market, in my opinion, is going to continue to become more segmented, right? When I was selling cars, and we talked about this before, I think there was really a couple of types of buyers. There were the kind of the get me dones, right? That I'll just take whatever you can get me, and then there was like the grinds and the mooches that would just beat you up for every. I think that now there's a whole array of different types of buyers, right? High funnel, low funnel. So I think that the market will continue to get segmented. I think part of that segment will be folks that want to transact more online and less with the relationship aspect of things. Who knows, right? There's so many big efforts and investments made in things that are 5-6 years down the line, whether it's autonomous cars, there's ride sharing now, right? Why own a car when you can just get it weekly?
Right.
I think the folks that are going to be most successful in the next 5 years are the ones that are willing to evolve with the industry. And I certainly hope to still be in it. And it'll be interesting to see where it goes in the next 5 years. Hopefully we'll see a continued growth and greater professionalism, more synchronicity between the brick and mortar and the virtual experience. So.
Right on, man. Yeah, I love that. That's pretty good, man. Hey, listen, awesome to have you on. Thank you so much. It's been awesome to actually do it live, like in person. So that's been cool. And I just want to kind of let everybody know that we're working on season 2. Thanks for catching the special extra episode. And as usual, we'll talk later.
The podcast you just heard was made using Anchor. Ever thought about making your own podcast? Anchor makes it really easy for anyone to get started. It's a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing podcasts. Best of all, it's 100% free. Sign up now at anchor.fm/new. That's anchor.fm/new to get started.